Welcome back to week 2 of tips for stress reduction, and this week we get to cover one of my favorite topics, which is posture. So if you haven't seen the first episode on breathing, go back and check that out before you watch this one. And without further ado, let's get right into this video. So we're going to go through each tip here individually in just a second, but as a general overarching theme, when we're talking about posture, we're not necessarily talking about good or bad posture, and a lot of us feel that there should be a good posture or that one posture is better than the other. And really, our two goals when it comes to posture for stress reduction purposes are to make sure that we're feeling grounded no matter what position we're in, and also that we identify any biases that we might have and that we're able to move away from those biases towards another bias. So we're going to go through all the tips now, and this introduces tip number 1 quite well. So tip number 1 is to change positions frequently throughout the day. So this is just about as common sense as it gets, but I'm going to do a quick little demonstration here to show you a few common postures we might find ourselves in, and then we'll talk about going towards the opposite bias. And so this is what someone who has good posture may look like. Right, we typically think of someone being very upright, perched, with everything stacked, and while this is a pretty good posture, an inability to get out of this posture towards something that might look more like our traditional slumping is probably just as bad as being in a slumped position but not being able to get out of that into what we traditionally think of as being good posture. So if you're that person who tends to sit in a little bit more of a slumped position, you will probably benefit from getting up a little bit straighter into what would be considered traditional good posture. But if you're the person who spends all their time like this, then you want to be able to come out of that a little bit. And for example, if you're this person with a very straight, erect spine here, you might want to just practice kind of letting the hips tuck under and letting the spine curve out a bit. Tips number 2 and 3 are going to deal with this sense of groundedness that we hope to get from our posture and positions throughout the day. So if we're focusing on something or anticipating something, sometimes our posture can reflect a state of stress, and you'll see something like a high guard position that might look something like this. People often bring the heels up from the ground. They'll be bearing weight only on the toes. They'll roll their whole body forward, either with the spine straight or with the spine rounded, and this person often loses sense of a few areas that we would call reference centers. And so the first area of reference center that I want to talk about here is the sit bones. So there's 2 ways that you're going to lose these. One is if you're the person who's sitting way back and you're rolling back, so you're actually sitting more towards your tailbone, you might lose sense of those sit bones. The other way we're going to lose a sense of that is if we roll so far forward through our hips, they're actually sitting more on the musculature of the thighs rather than on the bony parts of the pelvis. So you're going to find that happy medium between completely tucked under and super perched, and you're going to feel, especially if you're in a harder chair, your sit bones resting in a very comfortable but solid way on that surface, and this is going to give you a little bit of grounding. Now, to go along with this, tip number 3 is to get your heels down on the floor. So whether you're walking, standing, or sitting, heels are a great way to make you feel grounded. And if we lose the heels, we often feel like we don't have the ground below us. So if you're that person who has your heels up and your toes down and you're pulling your legs back like this, simply put the heels down on the floor and try to let gravity pull the legs down. This will contribute to that sense of groundedness. Now, if that's too difficult for you to feel, or you feel like one side you don't have that heel as well as the other, what you can do is elevate one or both of the feet with something underneath, and that's going to bias a little bit more weight under that heel of that side. Tip number 4 is to keep the head stacked over the body. And in today's day and age, whether it's the computer or the phone, a lot of us are dealing with a forward head posture, and honestly, myself included. So a forward head posture can occur in either a more slumped position, which would be our traditional forward head posture, or we can be that person who's very upright, and we can still have just a translation forward, but not our typical forward head posture. So in any event, we want to try to get our head to be stacked over the rib cage. And so if you're that person who has a forward head posture, you're going to try to avoid the tendency to let your head, neck, and upper body to come forward quite as much. Now, this is something that you would want to change gradually. You wouldn't want to try to force your head to stay back over the rib cage, because that can create an additional layer of tension. So the way I want you to think about it is just avoiding the tendency to let everything come forward in that upper half of your body. And that's going to reduce a lot of the tension in the neck and the upper back. And reducing that tension is often going to correlate with a reduced feeling of stress. Our last tip pays a little bit of homage to last week's discussion about breathing, and this is to avoid holding your breath. Now, as we discussed last week, breathing in a way that's relaxed and gentle can actually help reduce stress. But we also discussed on a mechanical level that breathing helps expand and contract the rib cage. And actually, the same thing is happening in your spine and in your pelvis as well. And so if we can keep, no matter whatever position we're in, a little bit of that dynamic movement from one bias to the next, that's actually going to help us feel a little bit more relaxed, and it's going to contribute to that sense of groundedness that we were looking for with some of the other tips today. So those are the 5 tips for this week. Again, try to remind yourself about changing postures at least every couple of minutes, whether it's 15, 20 minutes. You check your time, then check your position, and just see, are you going towards a bias? If you are, and you can identify that bias, try to go a little bit towards the other side for a little bit, and then work that in so that you have a dynamic ability to shift between different positions, and I think you'll find that that's going to help reduce your stress. So stay tuned for next week. We're going to talk about the basics of movement for stress reduction, which are going to be some good old-fashioned recommendations of how you can use movement to help reduce your stress. Thanks a lot for watching. Hopefully we'll see you next week in the next video.